Hello, good evening. We thank you for being with us tonight. I'm Blake Burman. We are following two major stories as we come on air this evening. Breaking right now, President Trump says he just got off the phone with the mayor of Minneapolis. Among the big questions tonight, is Border Patrol out? What NewsNation is learning about changing plans in Minnesota. This, of course, happening amid anger and unrest after federal law enforcement shot and killed Alex Pretti, a 37-year-old nurse. Right now, Minneapolis bracing for the possibility of more anti-ICE protests, as the White House now says the president wants an investigation into the shooting death.
He has said that he wants to let the investigation continue and let the facts lead in this case.
And tonight, we're also on top of the Great American Digout, a massive and deadly winter storm dumping heavy snow and ice on more than half of the nation. This is the scene no matter where you were, from Brooklyn to Texas, North Carolina to Little Rock. So right now, there are still hundreds of thousands without power. When will all the lights go back on? We are speaking with one of the top power companies this evening. But first tonight, here from the Hill, it is decision time for the Commander-in-Chief. President Trump says his Border Czar, Tom Homan, is now heading to the Twin Cities to evaluate and report back. And today, a notable change in tone from the administration after top officials jumped over the weekend to label the ICU nurse Alex Pretti a, quote, domestic terrorist.
President Trump does not want any Americans to lose their lives in the streets of America and in American communities across the country. He believes what happened on Saturday is a tragedy.
The president, we know today, now speaking by phone as well. I mentioned we just learned that he got off the phone with the Minneapolis mayor. He also spoke with the governor there of Minnesota, Tim Walz, and signaling that he and Walz seemed, quote, to be on a similar wavelength. The governor calling this an inflection point. Team coverage tonight across Minnesota. Kelly Meyer is at the White House right now covering the president. Minneapolis Council member Latricia Vital standing by with us as well. But first to our Allie Bradley in Minneapolis this evening. And Allie, there were conflicting reports throughout the day on whether Customs and Border Patrol agents might be leaving, if some might be staying. What are you hearing tonight on that front?
Yeah, hey, Blake. So we were actually told by nearly a dozen sources that Commander Bovino's teams are leaving as early as tomorrow, and now actually confirmed by Mayor Fry after a conversation with President Trump that some federal agents are, in fact, leaving the city, and that includes Commander Bovino. Now, some sources, however, are being told to stay. Some of my sources, they were packed up, they were ready to go, but then they were told to stay. So we're going to likely learn more as Border Czar Tom Homan is coming to Minnesota. There's a press conference as well tomorrow. We expect to learn more details there. But the president saying, quote, I am sending Tom Homan to Minnesota tonight. He has not been involved in that area, but knows and likes many of the people there. Tom is tough but fair and will report directly to me. Now, Homan will be focusing on immigration enforcement, but will also be digging into the fraud investigations in the state, according to Secretary Kristi Noem. Now, when it comes to that deadly shooting, the White House says DHS is leading the investigation alongside the FBI. CBP conducting its own internal investigation. Of course, CBP is the umbrella over Border Patrol. Border Patrol is who was involved. And we just learned from DHS officials that some federal agents involved were wearing body cameras, and there is camera footage from multiple angles of Saturday's incident, which the investigators are currently reviewing. Now, multiple immigration agents have told me that they're frustrated with the official DHS narrative about that shooting. Some say overall the political rhetoric is also making their jobs harder and their families less safe. One agent says his own family even turned on him because of the uniform that he wears, Blake. And Trump called his conversations with Mayor Fry productive, adding that former ICE director, Tom Homan, if you didn't know he was a former ICE director, there you go. He's going to meet with Mayor Fry tomorrow to continue those discussions. Blake.
Allie Bradley live for us in Minneapolis. Allie, thank you. Over to the White House now, and our Kelly Meyer in the room today in the press briefing with the press secretary as we learned more on how the administration views this tonight. Kelly?
Yeah, Blake, as you said, we've really seen this immediate shift in tone from this White House from Saturday when President Trump posted on True Social to, quote, let ICE patriots do their job, to 24 hours later saying they are reviewing everything about this shooting. And I noticed a few things heading into this week that the president is really changing his tune on. And the first, of course, was speaking with the Democratic governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. This is someone that the president had just recently blamed for, quote, inciting an insurrection. And now he says they are on the, quote, same wavelength and will work together. The president even weighing removing some officers from that area, as our Allie Bradley was just talking about. And the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, saying today that the president is asking for city and state officials to turn over all undocumented people with criminal histories over to police, among the other changes she mentioned. Take a listen to this.
If Governor Walz and Mayor Frey implement these common sense cooperative measures, CBP will no longer be needed to support ICE on the ground in Minnesota.
And also today, as Allie reported, Trump is sending in his Border Czar, Tom Homan, as his DHS Secretary Kristi Noem has been overseeing the operation. Noem was criticized by even those in the president's own party for calling the man a domestic terrorist. The White House says the president remains confident in Noem's ability to lead DHS, but Leavitt said that she hasn't heard the president characterize Pretti, the man who was shot and killed, in the same way that Noem did, or his Homeland Security advisor, Stephen Miller. Blake.
Kelly Meyer, live at 1600 tonight. Kelly, thank you. So President Trump over the weekend also laid out the multiple changes that the state of Minnesota and lawmakers here in Washington should make from his perspective. That includes greater cooperation from state and local law enforcement with federal law enforcement. And this is all in addition to legislation that the president wants to see to end sanctuary cities. With us tonight, Minneapolis City Council member Latricia Vital, with us tonight here on the Hill. Latricia, thanks for jumping in with us tonight. Obviously, a lot going on in your city. Our Allie Bradley reporting that some Border Patrol agents might be on their way out. Is that a good first step in your view?
That is a great first step. I talked to Mayor Jacob Frey about 20, 30 minutes ago, and he thinks the same. He told me that he thinks that there are going to be some agents leaving as early as tomorrow. He told me that he spoke with the president and actually had a really good conversation with the president and is feeling good about how we move forward as a city, as a state. And so I left the conversation feeling extremely optimistic.
Any more details you can share with us on what the mayor said to the president or vice versa?
I wish I had more details. I think we kept it, strictly about what I need to know as a person who represents folks in this city. And that is that we are hoping that some relief is going to be coming soon for the residents of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota. Is
the temperature being toned down? I mean, you just talked to me about this phone call. We also know that the president and the governor spoke today.
I think the temperature is being toned down between our leaders, and that feels really good, right? As someone who is on the ground every day and talking to folks, it's going to feel good to be able to answer my phone tonight and say that our mayor and our governor spoke with the president, and they're talking about how we get some relief in this state.
So I mentioned some of the posts from the president over the weekend. Here was the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, earlier today, then we'll pick it up on the other side.
The president is calling on Governor Walz and Mayor Frey for these three very simple and common sense points of cooperation so that ICE and local law enforcement can work together. Again, we are just asking for police to be police.
So tone is one thing, cooperation is another. From your perch, is it time for Minneapolis and the lawmakers there in Minnesota to cooperate with federal officials?
So I think what we've been talking about here is, we know that agents have always been in the state of Minnesota and in the city of Minneapolis. I think where the problem has come in is that it's felt unconstitutional. And so we want the bad folks taken out of our neighborhoods, out of our communities. We just don't want folks' rights to be violated when they're doing that.
All right, we'll leave it there. Latricia Vital with some news as she spoke to the mayor who just got off the phone with the president as well. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Good news. Nice to hear your perspective. Talk soon, hopefully. All right, joining me now, NewsNation contributor, former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. Also with us, Jesse Weber, host of Jesse Weber Live here on News Nation. Jesse, congrats. The show looks great, been phenomenal. Thanks for being with us. Let me start. I'm going to get to you in a second on the legal side. Let me start with Mick. You know Donald Trump well. There was a change, a reversal today out of the White House, Mick, out of the administration. Why?
Because they were losing. That's the easy question. The hard question is how and whether or not they're going to be able to follow through on it. But they knew they were getting their teeth kicked in the court of public opinion. Anytime an American citizen on his knees is shot in the back by law enforcement, regardless of the legal justification, there's going to be a political price to pay, and they knew it. Donald Trump doesn't really change policy as much as he changes personnel. And what you're seeing is exactly that. He's replacing effectively Kristi Noem with Tom Homan. That doesn't mean that Kristi's out of her position. It just means someone else is going to be in charge. He did the same thing, by the way, to me at the beginning of the COVID crisis. I was running the COVID task force. When he wanted to sort of make it a little bit more high profile, he replaced me with Mike Pence. So it's not necessarily a negative thing. It just marks a change in policy. Secondly, very quickly, it's noteworthy to me that he called Tim Walz and Mayor Fry in Minneapolis. Keep in mind, J.D. Vance was there.
What does that signal to you, Mick?
Yeah, that's a big change, and here's why. J.D. Vance was in Minneapolis over the weekend and didn't meet with any of those folks. Was there to complain about the fact there was no cooperation between state and local forces, but didn't call or apparently did meet with the mayor and the governor. And I think the president probably said, you know what, we should do that. So do watch the dynamic with Tom Homan and Kristi Noem for sure, but also watch the dynamic with J.D. Vance.
You know, Jesse, there was also a hearing before a U.S. district judge there in Minnesota, and the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, was asked about earlier today the letter that Pam Bondi had sent to officials there in Minnesota. And the reason why I bring it up is because that was front and center in the court hearing today. Here's what Ellison, the Attorney General, said, and then we'll pick it up on the other side.
I've heard not one single law enforcement or investigative agent in the state of Minnesota say that they won't share information with the federal government. I've heard quite the opposite from the federal government. I can tell you it's not about fraud. Because if he sent people who understand forensic accounting, we'd be having a different conversation. But he's sending armed, masked men.
One of the things that Pam Bondi mentioned in that letter, Jesse, is information on the voter rolls. Is that going to play a factor in the judge's decision, and what likely happens in the court system there?
So first, let me just say how unusual this is. In any kind of investigation, particularly a criminal investigation, there is always cooperation between state and federal authorities. Always, always. You never see anything like this. So I believe one of the judges said today that it's kind of unprecedented. And I believe in one of the court hearings, they said, we're going to give you till Wednesday to file more briefing in support of what's going on here. Let me tell you how unusual this also is. Usually, Blake, federal authorities, they're given deference, right? It's very difficult for a state court judge to question what federal authorities are doing. They have a right to carry out federal law. But when you look at the letter from Pam Bondi, if the question is, are the actions of federal authorities right now to change state law? Is it creating a burden on the state economy? Is it creating a danger? Is this punishing them for sanctuary city policies? That is something the judge is open to. Now, whatever the judge ends up deciding, if the judge puts a leash or restrictions on the federal government, that will be appealed. But I think Mick really laid it out. That's not even the point. The optics of this are so bad that you couple this legal action with the shooting, with now the conversations with Walz and Fry. This is creating another headache for the administration, another problem that may be very difficult to escape. So I think that this is another layer for them to think about.
Hey, Mick, let me leave you with this. There's a report out tonight that Kristi Noem, that they want her up on the Hill to testify March 3rd. Do you think she's still in her role by then?
Oh, sure. I do. So? I just think what you're going to see is more centralization of decision-making, even more than we've seen in the White House. Keep in mind, you put a graphic up a few minutes ago about the 4 things that the White House said they wanted from the state of Minnesota as part of a deal to let people, sort of go home. That's different than the terms that Pam Bondi put in her letter. She specifically put something, I think, about the election laws in Minnesota, and that's not in the 4 things that you saw out of the White House. So what I think you're saying is the White House taking more centralized control over this negotiation. You'll see Donald Trump now more directly involved, and you'll see an entirely different sort of policy going forward.
Mick Mulvaney, thank you, sir. Jesse Weber, it looks like from the comfort of his living room. See you tonight here on News
Not for
Nation.
long. I'm headed to the studio.
Not for long. Headed to the studio. I'll be watching you tonight, Jesse.
Thank
you so much. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Still to come. Did you hear about this one? Did the United States just infiltrate the highest ranks of the Chinese Communist Party? You heard that right. The headline coming. Happening right now, the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group has just arrived in the Middle East region. The deployment comes as the administration weighs potential options on Iran. The ships came from an area near China, leaving just one carrier now in the South China Sea. Live pictures of Beijing, where the time is just after 7 in the morning there in China tonight. And this is what the Chinese government is waking up to, reportedly investigating whether the United States infiltrated their military at the highest level. The Wall Street Journal now reports that this top Chinese general is accused of leaking, quote, core technical data on China's nuclear weapons to the U.S. He was once Xi Jinping's most trusted ally. So how in the world could the American government potentially gotten to him? I want to bring in retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton, U.S. Air Force retired, News Nation senior national security contributor, and Tracy Walder, former CIA officer, former FBI officer, News Nation national security contributor as well. General, thanks for being here. Tracy, nice to see you. As always, General, let's go ladies first here. Tracy, you used to work counterintelligence, I believe, in the FBI as it related to China. If this is true, how remarkable would this be?
Well, listen, Blake, first of all, I just want to lay this out that I do not think that this is necessarily true. I think an official of this stature, so he's been with President Xi for, 46 years. This is an individual that fought in the Vietnam War alongside China. Obviously, this would be a huge get. But when I worked at the CIA, getting assets in China is incredibly difficult. It's one of the hardest places to recruit simply because their surveillance and security systems are omniscient throughout China. It is incredibly difficult to penetrate their upper levels. It's just like trying to recruit a spy essentially in Al-Qaeda, which is really, really difficult to do. And when I worked as a special agent Chinese economic espionage, it was the same thing. The individuals that were here were loyal to the Communist Party and always had been. And so I think this is more of an insecurity on Xi's part of people disagreeing with him. And that's why he's sort of concocting this story, if you will.
General, the stunning headline, Wall Street Journal, China's top general accused of giving nuclear secrets to the U.S. This would be like essentially like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's the analogy here. What do you make of this, and what do you think Xi Jinping is thinking tonight?
Well, I'm with Tracy. I think this is something that's concocted by President Xi to fire his top general officer. And like you said, it's like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's been a long time coming. By the way, he's been purging the senior ranks of the military really since 2012. Most recently in 2023. First, he went after Chinese rocket force leaders, and now just a couple of days or so ago has purged his ranks of both Zhang here as well as the general officer who oversees their joint staff, much like their Joint Chiefs of Staff. And so this is something that's probably been a long time coming. By the way, Zhang is a close ally, as Tracy reported to Xi. He's also one of the very few combat leaders who are atop the Chinese military. So they've got a problem now because they lack experience, they lack depth, especially in the face of whatever would happen in the Asia Pacific region, or perhaps even trying to go after Taiwan and so forth. So this is something that Xi obviously had on his radar for a long time, very calculated. He's willing to make this general officer expendable in order to regroup and to perhaps now put in his really own two future leaders moving forward.
Tracy, what's Xi thinking tonight?
I think a lot of what she's thinking about actually is Taiwan. I really agree with General Newton is that, now one of the things you have, because you have fired all these individuals, I think he's the 11th in the past year, actually, is that you have a lack of checks and balances on Xi. And the U.S. just announced arms sales, actually, against Taiwan recently. And I think a lot of this has to do with people perhaps disagreeing with his stance and his actionables on Taiwan. And so I really do think that Taiwan is top of his mind right now, and this is the latest casualty.
It's a stunning and remarkable headline. Interesting to hear your perspectives. Lieutenant General Richard Newton, Tracy Walder with us tonight. I got to leave it there. You know, I'll see you both soon. Appreciate you both.
Okay, Blake.
Yep, still to come, of course, here on The Hill. Change of tone, and are there change in tactics? The administration signals a pullback in Minneapolis.
The president is calling on Governor Walz and Mayor Frey for these 3 very simple and common sense points of cooperation.
Plus, in the dark, power outages still impacting more than 500,000 Americans. We are live with an expert on the front line who is trying to turn those lights back on. The very latest, as you might be still digging out. Bottom of the hour, some of the top stories coming into our newsroom tonight as it's 5:30 across the Midwest, 6:30 here in Washington, as President Trump is now signaling he might cooperate with the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz on immigration enforcement, potentially vice versa as well. The Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey saying that some federal agents will be leaving the city tomorrow. Tonight, more protests are expected after federal law enforcement shot and killed an ICU nurse, Alex Pretti, on Saturday. The shooting amplified unrest and anger across that city and many parts across the country. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt offering an olive branch, you could say today, to Minnesota leaders. Cooperate with immigration enforcement and Border Patrol would then leave Minneapolis.
If Governor Walz and Mayor Frey implement these common sense cooperative measures that, I will add, have already been implemented in nearly every single other state across the country, Customs and Border Patrol will not be needed to support ICE on the ground in Minnesota.
The potential pullback includes some Border Patrol officers who have surged to Minneapolis to support ICE. The operation is expected to continue in the city. From NewsNation affiliates all across the country now, this might be one of the many scenes in your community tonight. Would you look at this? Connecticut to Texas, PA to Tennessee, and parts in between. It is the great American dig out right now. More than 200 million people felt the effects of this weekend's winter storm. More than 24 lost their lives in this storm as well. President Trump has approved emergency declarations for dozens of states and counting. FEMA surging resources to states. Now, some parts of the U.S. saw nearly 2 feet of snow, which now covers more than half of the entire country. Get that, half of the country tonight has snow. Before the storm, it was 25%, according to government meteorologists. Power out for thousands of Americans, especially in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee. This is the map this evening, the outages as of recently. Here's what I want you to notice, okay? The states here in yellow, they have power outages. They're not out of the woods at all. And it gets more intense with the darker colors here, but look across this part, okay? That's northern Louisiana into northwestern Mississippi, into the west part of Tennessee. It appears as if the worst power outages were this band right here as the storm moved north and east Saturday and Sunday. The storm has also left a travel mess in its wake. More than 11,000 flights canceled yesterday, more than 5,000 cancellations as of this afternoon. Our Jessica Cartalia live in New York City with what they are seeing there. Jessica, a record where you are, right?
Yeah, it's been unbelievable here. It sure is pretty, though, Blake, I have to tell you. Unfortunately, we have gotten word that about 25 people have lost their lives. That may be due to hypothermia as well as the shoveling. But take a look at this. We are, just to give some perspective, about 30 miles north of Manhattan in a cute town called Mount Kisco, where there is so much snow. Crews have done a phenomenal job of clearing the roads. Nearly 270 million people, as you mentioned, across the central and east coast were under these winter weather alerts. Wind chills also expecting to be incredibly cold. Later this week, we're also expecting even more winter weather throughout the United States. And also temperatures are expected to drop. So they're very concerned about freezing on the roads, ice as well. A foot or more of snow has fallen in at least 17 different states, from New Mexico all the way to New Hampshire. The FAA also investigating that private plane crash in Maine, as well as several flights that have been canceled and delayed throughout the country. Blake, we're going to continue to watch this. But again, here in Mount Kisco, just so much snow. Businesses doing all they can to clear this snow out so employees can get to work safely.
All right, Jessica Cartalia, live for us tonight in New York. Jessica, thank you. North Carolina, across the Carolinas tonight, thousands still without power. The governor there, Josh Stein, saying today that utility companies are working to get power restored.
With the ice, there may be power outages throughout the course of this week. Temperatures are going to get very cold at night for the next few days, so stay warm.
So what does it take to get the lights back on? Duke Energy services much of the Carolinas. Jeff Brooks is with Duke Energy, joins us live tonight here on the Hill. Thanks for being with us. I don't know how much sleep you got over the weekend.
Not a whole lot.
It can't be a
but
lot.
We have had plenty of opportunities to work, so there you go. But
there you go. What's the status in the Carolinas tonight, Jeff?
Well, we've made some great progress today. The weather improved. Yesterday was a rough day. We started out better than we had projected. We thought we were going to be in the hundreds of thousands potentially, but we came in only about 50 to 60,000 at one time at the peak. But then a lot of that happened late in the evening last night. So as people were kind of getting to the end of the day and had power, they would lose power. And so overnight we worked and we got a lot of people back up. And this morning we really dug in and moved those reinforcements that we had brought in from out of state in to help our local crews. And I'm looking now, and it looks like we're down just under 10,000 for the first time in the storm. And that was down from over 50,000 this morning. So the big challenge is the hundreds of outage locations our crews had to go, physical damage in hard to reach access areas in Western North Carolina, the upstate of South Carolina. So it's been a tough storm, even though it was smaller.
There could be another one, though, this weekend, which we're monitoring another one that could, again, go through the Southeast and all the way up into Maine. If that's the case, are you ready would back-to-back? How much does that potentially worry you?
Yeah, we're already starting our planning for the second wave. Our meteorology team has been monitoring it. We've got a lot of crews in the Carolinas right now, so we have the ability to adjust those deployments as we need to. And we're going to watch it. Hopefully we get a favorable outcome with that. But every storm is a unique challenge. And we take the learnings from the one storm, apply them to the next. So they're working really hard to close out these outages, give people their heat back, their lights back, at least let everybody reset. And then if there's more weather, we'll be ready to respond.
Jeff Brooks, good luck. You're due a vacation in a few weeks or so, but you got a big one before you tonight there across the Carolinas. Jeff Brooks, Duke Energy, with us. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course. Well, from the slopes to the courtroom now. Ryan Wedding, the former Olympic snowboarder turned international drug kingpin, appearing in federal court today for the first time after being captured in Mexico. He entered pleas of not guilty to all 17 felony charges against him, which include drug and murder charges. Prosecutors say the former Olympian became the head of a major drug trafficking operation, smuggling 6 metric tons of cocaine a year in Los Angeles, and ordering violent crimes to protect that business. At one point, he was among the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. Well, still to come tonight, the administration and the government there in Minnesota are talking cooperation. So what is next across Minneapolis when we return?
Americans rely on The Hill for politics and policy news more than any other digital politics publication. The Hill. Trusted, credible, nonpartisan. Visit thehill.com today.
This individual who came with weapons and ammunition to stop a law enforcement operation of federal law enforcement officers committed an act of domestic terrorism.
Secretary Noem said Alex Pretti committed an act of domestic terrorism. Stephen Miller labeled Pretti a domestic terrorist. Does the president agree with them?
Look, as I've said, I have not heard the president characterize Mr. Pretti in that way.
The White House today seemingly walking back some comments from within the administration over the weekend about the shooting death of Alex Pretti. during an immigration operation in Minneapolis. Full panel here with me now. Daniela Diaz, White House reporter for the digital news outlet Notice. Dan Cannonen, former Battleground States Director for the Biden and Harris campaigns. And Mark Short, former Chief of Staff to Vice President Mike Pence. Gentlemen, hello. Thanks for being here. Daniela, hello. There was a change. There was a total shift. I shouldn't say total shift. There was a shift over at the White House earlier today. You heard the DHS secretary over the weekend labeled this domestic terrorism, and today it was a tragedy, and the president wants to see a full investigation.
I would call it a total shift.
Okay.
It really did seem what we saw over the weekend was the administration defending what happened in Minneapolis on Saturday, and what we've even seen in the last 2 hours, 3 hours, is a total flip. We saw President Donald Trump say that he had a great call with the governor of Minnesota. We saw Jacob Frey also talk to the president and have what sound like a good discussion about what happened in Minnesota. This is such a stark contrast to what we've seen of what's been playing out in Minneapolis. It's clear that there's a shift, and it seems that this could lead to a major change in how the administration is responding in that city.
I was speaking, Dan, to a city council member, a Democrat there in Minneapolis, who told me, did you hear the interview? I
saw that.
Yeah, who told me that she had actually just gotten off the phone with the mayor and sounded optimistic about the conversation that happened between Trump and the Minneapolis mayor. In this concept of the White House moving, do Democrats need to move on this concept of cooperation and how much to cooperate with federal law enforcement?
I take a little issue with part of the premise of your question. Although I agree with there's a bit there that's real, I think. They do work with ICE on these things. In fact, earlier the governor made a point that ICE had trumpeted like 1,600 violent criminals that were detained in this operation. They went back and looked at the rolls. NPR did this, Minnesota Public Radio, and saw that almost all of them had previously been given over by the Department of Corrections to ICE. That already happens. But it is true in sanctuary policies.
It's a sanctuary city, yeah.
Yeah, but there are some elements where they will not, in certain instances, do the immigration status and then give that and detain those folks long enough for ICE to pick them up. Those are policy areas I think are worthy of discussion. But it's not true they don't cooperate. That's sort of a red herring here. But on the Fry call and on the Walls discussion, Mick made the point about how big of a deal it was for the president to make that call and do that. Let's not forget, besides Vance not meeting with these guys, when there were the assassinations of the Minnesota lawmakers, Trump never called Walls. And when pressed about it on Air Force One, he said, why would I call that guy? From Jump Street, there was a broken relationship that starts at the top.
You know Trump well. Why?
Look, he's a consumer of news. He knows when it's gone too far, and I think he's been watching, and he sees that clearly he needed to take a change. But I also found it interesting that when he says Tom Homan's in charge now, he didn't say Tom Homan's going to report to the secretary. He didn't say Tom Homan's report separately to the White House. He said Tom Homan's reporting to me, which I think was a clear signal that those that thus far have been in charge of this policy, he is pushing them aside to make sure Tom Homan is fully empowered.
Pushing them aside or pushing them out?
That's a good question. I think time will tell.
There's been a lot of discussion on this, obviously. Roll what Kash Patel said over the weekend, and then the White House asked about it today.
You cannot bring a firearm loaded with multiple magazines to any sort of protest that you want. It's that simple.
The president supports the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding American citizens, absolutely. So while Americans have a constitutional right to bear arms, Americans do not have a constitutional right to impede lawful immigration enforcement operations.
You are tapped into the conservative movement. How does the conservative movement read what happened there over the last 48
Well, I
hours?
think you've already seen the Second Amendment groups have pushed back against the White House. The Second Amendment groups have been a strong supporter of Republicans. They've been a strong supporter of the president. And I think pretty clearly the Second Amendment is pretty straightforward and doesn't have caveats and clauses about protests. I think that many in the White House also seem to have a struggle with consistency about firearms and protests. There was 3,000 rounds of ammunition that Secret Service took on January 6th, over 180 deadly weapons that were seized by Secret Service, and that was a peaceful protest and everyone was pardoned. So to now come out and say we can't have somebody bringing a weapon to an ICE protest, I think seems to be counterintuitive.
They're clearly sort of cleaning that up today, Caroline Levitt, from the briefing. One of the, again, we could talk so many different lanes here. You cover Congress. Is now the possibility of reform within DHS and whether or not that will lead to a government shutdown. For background, the House sent bills over to the Senate, and then what occurred over the weekend, now all of a sudden you have Democrats coming out and saying, well, wait a minute, we're not going to provide the votes. Government shutdown could be coming at the end of this week. Where does it stand?
Just days ago, I was convinced there was not going to be a shutdown. I was telling everyone there was not going to be a shutdown. Today, I'm thinking it's very, very likely. That's what I've been writing. That's what my sources are telling me on Capitol Hill. The issue is, and it's complicated, want to stay really general on this, there's a package of appropriations bills that will get a vote this week in the Senate. It's passed the House. Right. The issue being that package includes funding for Department of Homeland Security. Even Senate Republicans today have come out saying there needs to be reforms on DHS. I mean, that really opens the door to potentially something happening in the next week to be able to pass some sort of bill to fund the complete government. However, there's going to need to be changes should that pass the Senate. And it's unclear whether that could happen within that time that needs to happen, which is Friday at midnight. That's when government funding lapses.
What's your party going to do here?
Well, look, there's $100 billion in the big, beautiful bill for ICE, a tenfold annual increase here. And you have an agency that's totally out of control. And I think it is notable and good that they're backing off some of the worst rhetoric from the last couple of days, which was indefensible and abhorrent. But it's still true. There's dozens and dozens of videos where it's not just the killing, but ICE officers like marauders going through these streets, knocking people down, pepper spraying without provocation, harassing anyone that's there.
They're also getting it on the other side.
But they're not getting violence, Blake. They're getting people filming with cameras. In fact, this Alex Pretti situation, if you look at the video, which is hard to look at, he literally is filming in the street. He moves out of the street when asked, and then they pepper spray a woman who he tries to then help, and they pepper spray him when he's looking away from them. There is no justification for masked, secret guys doing this. And by the way, the person or persons who killed Alex Pretti was moved out of that state and then put back on the job. I don't know of any law enforcement agency in the world where when you're involved in a shooting with a death, you're back on the beat somewhere else the next day without an investigation. The point is, $100 billion, which could fund all the ACA tax credits that they cut, could help with the national debt, could help with other issues of defense, could actually prosecute immigration reform effectively, and it's wasted on this terror. It's got to stop.
Look, I think that the administration is clearly changing their course because they've overstepped here. I think a lot of Americans supported the president's actions to stop the stem at the border. It was one of the reasons he was elected, because it was out of control in the Biden administration. But I don't think there was ever the same support for the deportations. And I think some of what we've seen illustrates that. But I think the Democrats can overreach like they always do. I think if they force a shutdown over this, I think that a lot of Americans still don't support sanctuary cities. And as Dan said, he's right. The Department of Corrections has been working with ICE, but local law enforcement hasn't in Minnesota. That's the nature of sanctuary cities. And so I'm not sure that that's really what Americans want either. When people are here illegally, they don't necessarily say, hey, hands off to DHS and ICE.
By the way, something notable today. I want to show you the op-eds of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New York Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Left and right. And they are basically all saying the same thing. The Washington Post called it a turning point. The New York Post said it's time to de-escalate, Mr. President. The Wall Street Journal called for a pause. Those are the papers, as you know, that Donald Trump reads. All right, speaking of President Trump, he's headed to Iowa tomorrow. The focus is supposed to be, Daniela, on affordability. What do you think we get out of Trump tomorrow? We didn't hear from him today at all. What do you think we get from him tomorrow?
He's clearly going to touch on this. I mean, if there's something that President Donald Trump does is talk off the cuff and talk about the things that he thinks is important in that moment. But the issue that I talk to when I speak to Republicans, more can elaborate on this, is that they want him to stay focused on the issue of affordability. They don't think that these press issues, that these crises that are happening around the administration help his case in trying to help ahead of the midterms and help Republicans keep the majorities in both the House and the Senate. That essentially is how he's able to govern. So it's unclear whether that's going to help if he doesn't stick to that topic.
He'll try to get there, but he's got two open races, governor and Senate in Iowa, which are going to be very contested, I think, this time around. And don't forget, Iowa, a lot of Iowa is in the Minneapolis media market. They're seeing all this stuff. And let me tell you, as someone who's from Minnesota, with members of our staff, we have an office there, it feels even different there than it does here. And I think that's going to spill over into the neighboring state.
What do you expect from Trump tomorrow?
I think they're right. He will talk about this, but this trip was scheduled before the event.
Yes. This is the weekly on the road.
I think that it was intended to be to address affordability. I think there's fewer places that his trade agenda is hurting farmers more than the heartland of America in Iowa. And I think he's trying to tell them, I'm going to be lowering prices. It seems that so far, the only thing that he's been doing is borrowing playbook from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, though, in talking about more government intervention as opposed to actually allowing the marketplace to work.
All right, we'll leave it there. Mark?
I agree with Mark.
Dan, yeah. Mark's made his opinions known on the trade agenda. We'll see Trump out on the road tomorrow. Thank y'all. Appreciate it. Still to come. The winter storm. We got it over the weekend, right? Is round 2 next. I'll show you. All right, we have some breaking news coming in tonight. I told you I was going to get to the weather, but this is images in, this is Minneapolis, right, Andrew? So this is what's going on in Minneapolis right now. And the breaking news is this. Sources are now telling our Ali Bradley that Greg Bovino, who has been the commander at large of Border Patrol, that's the title that he was given, has been relieved from that official post, and instead will report back to the El Centro district. Bottom line with this, Donald Trump said today that Tom Homan is going into Minneapolis, that he's the guy that's going to report directly to him. And tonight, and these are live pictures there, it appears one of the first major changes now taking place are Ali Bradley reporting Greg Bovino relieved of his duties as commander-at-large there at Customs and Border Protection. Our Elizabeth Vargas, of course, will be all over this shortly. She'll be speaking with the Republican state representative as our coverage continues here on News Nation. She's speaking to Nolan West of Minneapolis on his message to his constituents and why he says enough is enough. So that's coming up here. Seconds away, the news, Greg Bovino with a new title. I thank you so much for watching us here on the Hill. Bottom line, there's a lot of news and things are changing. We appreciate you trusting us to tell you what's going on. I'm Blake Burman. Elizabeth starts right now.